you're a die-hard fan of the EA UFC franchise, then it's more than likely you've been eagerly awaiting EA's latest edition, EA UFC 5, which was released to the general public on the 27th of October. Now, during the lead up to this launch, there was much controversy. For one, EA had released a gameplay reveal trailer stating that what we were seeing was game engine footage. Let's face it, it was the sheer quality of this footage which reassured many of us to place our hard-earned money on the Deluxe Edition, which also includes exclusive access to play as Mike Tyson, as well as the legend himself, Muhammad Ali. Sadly, many were upset to find these motion caption scenes were not part of the core game mechanics, and the controversy doesn't end there. In the months building up to promotion, EA Sports have partnered with well-established influencers such as Marshall Mind to use their influence to help promote their pre-purchase sales, which leads us to two questions. Does EA UFC 5 truly live up to the hype, and is the standard edition worth the price of $70? I'm Claimer, let's take a deep dive. So, what does EA UFC have to offer players out the gate? Offline play allows you to compete on a UFC main event, as well as defend or challenge for the belt. In addition, combat can take place outside of the octagon. Fights can take place in the backyard, as well as a blood sport-inspired Kumite tournament. Now, if all of this sounds familiar, that's because it is. Aside from the new game mode entitled Fight Week Challenges, which pits you in matchups in relation to an upcoming UFC event, as well as an online career where you can work your way up to a title match using your created fighter, the core game modes remain the same. But let's begin with the campaign mode. And the foundation of any good modern campaign lies in the ability to create a fighter. And sadly, it's the same as UFC 4. It remains slow and clunky. There is no way to speed up the sliders. The body types available remain cartoonish. The eyebrow selection is abysmal. Stubble looks like it's been drawn on with charcoal. There are a plethora of things to complain about, but I won't go on, you get the picture. As for the campaign mode, it's virtually the same as UFC 4. However, there are some nice additions. There are new cutscenes now with Coach Davis, which showcase your CAF's ability to talk.
That was months ago. You already know I'm done with it.
Is the dialogue Oscar-worthy? No. However, hearing my CAF communicate his feelings did leave me a tad bit more invested in his journey. It's just a shame that immersion is instantly broken due to the NPC characters in the background who communicate via awkward hugs and high fives. Unlike Fight Night Champion, where side characters have a personality, EA felt that these character interactions were a worthy replacement. But listen, I digress. We move on to gameplay, and this is where I can really get into the positives. Kind of. For those new to the game, you have an assortment of weapons at your disposal. Fundamentally, you can punch, kick, elbow, knee, take your opponent to the ground, where you can apply ground and pound or submit them. In comparison to UFC 4, the most notable change is the improvement of input delay. Now, this does not apply across the board. However, jabs and hooks do feel more responsive. They've also reworked their blood textures as well as blood particles, which by the way did exist in UFC 4. However, now the particles are less transparent, and it's a great inclusion to enhance the impact of strikes landed. We also have the inclusion of doctor stoppages, which depending on how that's implemented could be a good or bad thing. Currently, it doesn't take that many strikes to open up cuts on your opponent, and the last thing you want in a highly intense competitive match is for it to be stopped due to a cut. In addition, we also have the inclusion of an instant replay system, where we are able to see the finer details of our work. Skin appropriately ripples and heads contort relative to where a strike has landed, and I'm sure that will offer satisfaction to your casual fan. The only problem is, it's a reworked version of the knockout that just occurred. You see, as far as I'm aware, they have not changed the actual knockout animations. They remain highly unrealistic. For example, you can land a cross, tilting your opponent's head back, but land it again with exactly the same momentum. Your opponent crumples to the ground as if they were struck by a wrecking ball. If that didn't take you out of the moment enough, every knockout is followed by casino sound effects, which are used to encourage habits and addiction. Fighters continue to look like they're gliding across the octagon, almost as if their hips are being held up by strings. A perfect example of movement done right can be found in the latest boxing game Undisputed. Despite its flaws, which I believe will get fixed, it's undeniable how footwork implemented well drastically increases gameplay immersion. In addition, when certain punches land, your opponent sometimes appears to be having an epileptic fit. Their hands and fingers will shake, and it leaves you feeling like like you're in an uncanny valley. Now, in regards to striking impact, there are improvements to stamina reduction based on movement and damage based on strikes landed. However, you'll find yourself landing perfectly clean strikes, timed to perfection, which at the least you would expect to daze your opponent. However, they're able to shake it off, and therefore they are undeterred. Striking online is still like playing Rock'em Sock'em Robots. You're not so much relying on timing and precision, you're relying on your knowledge of combinations and exploits, both how to use them and how to avoid them. We move on to the new submission system. Gone is the dreadful minigame which has plagued EA UFC since its infancy. Once you take your opponent to the ground, you can initiate the submission by tapping the movement stick left. When in position, you can simply hold the direction of the stick left to sink it in, whilst your opponent defends the submission by pulling the movement stick in the opposite direction. Pulling that submission off depends on the stamina and submission skill level of both fighters. Submission attempts cause damage to your opponent's limbs, and as a deterrent, you lose a lot of stamina trying to pull those submissions off. Whilst I think this is an improvement, why we can't simply have a shoulder button which toggles between wrestling and jiu-jitsu, where you move the stick in the direction of the limb you wish to attack? Wouldn't this be far more intuitive than constantly looking at a prompt on the screen? And that leads me to the biggest issue of UFC 5. It is over-engineered. What I mean by this is every aspect of the game requires you to do too much. Therefore, you will suffer from cognitive overload unless you're a pro player who invest days and months of their lives mastering non-intuitive mechanics. The greatest fighting games are intuitive. You can rely on the fundamentals to win. Timing, precision, intuition, and instinct should be able to get you the win against someone who's mastered every combination in the game. Sadly, in UFC 5, considering they're wearing tiny gloves, you can't keep your opponent at bay with the jab. Slipping strikes is hit and miss, and the strafing in this game is so over the top and slow, it will have the opposite effect and put you in danger. We can apply over-engineering to the ground game. You might find yourself in a position where you want to enter full mount, but for whatever reason that is not available, which leads you to look at the prompts and decide based on limited options which route to take. The minute you have to look at prompts, you're no longer playing an intuitive game. Let's move on to the Deluxe Edition, valued at $100, and I'll keep this short. It is almost criminal that EA have included Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali and simply assigned generic UFC movesets. What I mean by this is they are just skins. The classic fighting styles you've come to expect from Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson do not exist in this game. And that leads me to my conclusion. Is UFC 5 worth the purchase? Well, if you're a fan of UFC 4 and primarily play the game online, the only way I can recommend UFC 5 is if you purchase it at a heavy discount, because at its current standard price, this is not UFC 4.5, this is UFC 4.2. On the flip side, if you're new to the EA UFC formula, likewise, I would suggest waiting until a heavy discount is available, because out of a bad bunch from 1 to 5, EA UFC 5 has the best campaign and best fighting mechanics. However, that really is not saying much. EA UFC Sports have shown once again that we can't place our trust in their initial high-quality reveal trailers. They continue to release incremental updates disguised as sequels, and our only hope is that a competitor emerges to finally create a game that supersedes the greatest UFC game ever made, UFC Undisputed 3. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Am I wrong? Are you thoroughly enjoying UFC 5? Or do you agree, feeling like you threw your money down the drain? The raw, uncut, unfiltered alternative of this review will be out next week, so don't forget to subscribe. Have a great weekend. Peace.